And we're talking about where sort of criminal justice issues are heading in 2014. And Dave was making a point. He said anybody who lived through the 1988 campaign, and that was the Willie Horton campaign, and then Michael Dukakis getting pilloried on the death penalty and all this, that was the height of sort of the triumph of tough on politics, the tough on crime politics from the Republican Party. Congressman, I wonder, when we look at what's happening at the federal level now. We look at Jerry Brown in California with 127 pardons. Pat Quinn, the governor of Illinois, has had, I don't have the number in front of me, it's hundreds. He's had a ton of pardons. But when you look at the governor of your state, when you look at Andrew Cuomo, a guy who just refuses to pardon anybody, does he represent a certain type of Democrat who is still haunted by that tough on crime? Why do I keep calling it tough on politics era? The tough on crime era.
Well, it's not clear to me why the governor has been very economical in terms of his issuance of pardons or commutations. His father wasn't particularly judicious either as it relates to the pardon power. I think the broader point, which is an important one, is that the war on drugs, which is widely acknowledged as a failure right now, violated a basic tenet of American justice, which is that the punishment should fit the crime. And with these mandatory minimums, particularly as it relates to crack cocaine offenses, that clearly was not the case. As evidenced by the recent commutations by President Obama, 6 individuals, nonviolent drug offenders serving life sentences. Clearly, that violates basic American values in terms of justice and the fairness of the criminal justice system. Now, what Congress did a few years ago with the Fair Sentencing Act was dramatically reduce the disparity between crack cocaine sentencing and powder cocaine sentencing. It was, I believe, around 100 to 1. It reduced it to a little under 20 to 1. That still is not justified under any conception of sort of fairness and justice as it relates to the actual crime. And so I think Congress has got more work to do in this regard. That's what the president has suggested in his commutation statements, and I'm hopeful that we're going to tackle it next year. The
other issues, so we had this summer, you had Eric Holder who issued these new guidelines. It basically told federal prosecutors indictments for low-level cases in the indictments not to list quantities, because if you list the quantities, it triggers all of these harsh mandatory minimum sentences that are a product of, like, the 1986, I think it was the Anti-Drug Act of 1986, a product of that tough-on-crime era. Those are guidelines being issued by one attorney general. I guess the question is, those guidelines are really only as good as, they only last as long as the Obama administration lasts.
I think that's right. But, when I was first looking into pardons, one of the things I wondered, because there were fewer and fewer and fewer, are we a country that's no longer interested in forgiveness? Is mercy just not something we care about anymore? But when I looked around at states, and I did see states where governors wanted to pardon, where actually prosecutors were not interested in seeking this, where judges were complaining about mandatory minimums. And I really kind of got the sense that actually there's a lot that can be changed quite quickly. There really is consensus here. And I think, you're right about the 1988 campaign, that, you would never know that we ended up here. But I do think, very much that, like, while that may have affected some people in their desire to pardon some presidents, some governors, I think there is just a wide belief now that everything that took place just is no longer working.
And I think part of the story is, we've put this up before, it's still, I can't get over looking at it, just the difference between the political climate of, you go back to 1994, we have this poll here asking voters, what is the top issue? In 1994, top issue in the country, they said crime, 26%. You think what the crime rates were like in the early 1990s. Take the same poll 19 years later, in 2013, what's the top issue in the country? 2% now saying crime, violence, 1% saying drugs. If you look at the homicide rate, you compare it, over the last 60 years, I mean, you look at it, it peaked at over 10.2 per 100,000 in 1980. It was close to 10 in the early 90s. It's all the way down to 4.8 right now. So it's almost as if you take it, you remove the urgency of the issue, and you depoliticize it that way.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe if crime rates, spike back up even slightly, I wonder what the politics will be on this. I mean, to just come back to your point on Andrew Cuomo for a moment. I mean, it seems like no one's really pure on this, right? I mean, Cuomo ran for governor in 2002, essentially arguing that the Rockefeller drug laws had lost their relevance in New York. Jerry Brown has also had sort of complicating things. So I don't think anyone's pure. I mean, everyone seems worried about what's going to happen if you commute the wrong person or something like that.
Yeah, I should also point out, too, though, but one of the things that Governor Cuomo has done as it relates to criminal justice reform is he's led the charge to decriminalize marijuana. And in the city of New York, arrests for small quantities of marijuana are the #1 category of arrests, leading to unnecessary criminalization, largely of low-income individuals of color. And I believe it was in 2012 that he publicly championed that issue, brought together the 5 district attorneys from the city of New York, as well as Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, Mayor Bloomberg, to support a legislative change. The Republicans in the New York State Senate are still fighting it, but the governor did step out on that issue and demonstrate leadership. I think further evidence of the fact that the climate has significantly changed.
And that's another front in all this, too. In New York, you have the ballot initiative in Colorado last year on marijuana. You have Washington, and you have the Obama administration basically saying we're not going to be using our Justice Department to go after these states as they implement legal marijuana. That's another topic, though.